Okay. Welcome to Chapter 7 then of the Business and Finance course. Chapter 7 is all about the finance function, so hopefully lots of bits that will be familiar to you guys. We can see from the topic list here, it's a relatively basic overview. We're just going to think about what the finance function does, how it's managed, and how we can measure how well they're doing. So like I said, lots of things that you hopefully find familiar, and a few definitions that we're just going to have to memorize. I'm sure you're used to that now, having done 6 chapters of business and finance. So the first thing we need to look at is generally what the finance function does. I'm sure you're going to find that you do some of these things. Some of you might do just a particular group of activities. Some of you might do a bit of everything, and that's kind of one of the things we need to take away, is that although we list them here as 4 distinct different things, they very often are interrelated, and if they're not done by the same person, it involves a lot of kind of work together within the function. Okay, the first of the 4 tasks then is recording financial transactions. So this most likely includes some of your more basic accounting jobs that you might do at work, if you entering an invoice onto the system and that sort of thing. Now, it's really important that the business has an accurate record of these things. So although it can be a relatively straightforward job, or perhaps not straightforward, a relatively low level job sometimes, it's actually very, very important. And part of this recording of all of our transactions is this idea that we act as a steward. So this kind of stewardship in terms of our resources as a business, that's a very important function of the finance department. Next up, we've got management accounting there. So generally, management accounting is all about trying to find a way to improve the business. So less to do with financial accounting standards, less to do with a set way of doing things, and really just trying to add value. So your monthly MI reports, for example, to give your managers some information over how well the business is doing, putting together a net present value in order to enable some good decision making, making sure that you measure how well the business is doing through ratio analysis, and we're going to come on the course to start thinking about those non-financial measures, for example, and also the planning and control activities. So at the start of the period, you might put together a budget, and then throughout the period, then you'll measure your actuals against that budget just to see how well you're doing. So the control aspect's really, really important too. Financial reporting then is going to include your financial statements, so making sure that we give good, accurate information to our external users. And I suppose the most common external users would be your shareholders, your investors, your potential investors down the line. So it's really, really important that side of things is done well. And obviously, the more accurately you record your financial transactions, both your management accounting and your financial reporting are going to be better for that. So really, really important that we consider all different activities as a group. Finally, then we've got treasury management. So thinking about how we manage our cash. So considering our long-term investments, the balance between our debt and our equity finance, which is something we're going to look at in more detail in a later chapter. But treasury is all about looking after our cash, really. Okay, so we've got the first interactive question of the chapter. So as always, what we'll do is I'll get you to just pause the recording there. Have a think about those different headings. So we're looking for 3 tasks you might expect to be performed within each area. If you can't think of 3, that's fine. Just come up with a couple, and then click play again, and we'll have a chat through those. Okay, so if you can pause that now and have a go. Okay, there is a longer list of answers in the final chapter, so chapter 15 of your course notes, and they'll go through some potential answers. Let's have a look then and see if we can come up with a few ourselves here then. So first up, we've got management accounting. So I know management accounting is all about trying to provide good information, trying to think about the future of the business. So we did mention there when we were discussing what management accounting really is, this idea of putting together some sort of budget. So budgeting would be a key area of management accounting. So it could be putting together a production budget, putting together your master budget, so your financial statement budget, so P&L, your balance sheet, perhaps putting together a cash flow forecast and things like that. We also said that, part of that, or following on from the budgeting process, then will be this idea of performance measurement. So this could be thinking about how well the business is doing. It could be thinking about how well a particular department and so on is doing. Also, really key then to management accounting will be the pricing decision. There's lots of ways to think about that. Do you add up all of the costs of making something and then add a margin or a markup to get your sales price, or do you start with the sales price and work your way back from there, trying to think about what somebody would be willing to pay for your product? Okay, I'm just running out of space a little bit here. Let's see if we can have a look at treasury management. Treasury then would play a big part in thinking about what your financing is going to be made up of. So all those financing decisions: where are we going to get our money from? How long are we looking to borrow for? Are we looking for a variable or fixed interest rate? All those important aspects. Also, kind of following on from that, they'll be very integral in the managing of my financial risk, for example. Okay, so when you're deciding whether to take out a loan or perhaps raise some finance through selling shares, so some equity finance, financial risk is going to play a big part in that. And again, we'll consider the balance between debt finance and equity finance in a later chapter. Also, just thinking about our cash balance or let's say working capital management. So considering how we manage our receivables, how we have our credit process, and so on. So all those different aspects of our working capital cycle. And then finally, for my financial reporting, so obviously you're going to have your financial statements. So putting together your statutory accounts. You might have some reporting to tax authorities. And perhaps some, there may be some sort of regulation to think about. So regulatory reports, something like that. Let me just correct that for you. Okay, so don't worry if you've got exactly those. Like I said, have a look at the back of the notes there to see whether your answers match up. As long as they were along those lines, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so we've had to think about what the finance function actually does. Now, before we move on to think about how we can measure how well the finance function performs those tasks, we also need to think about how we manage the finance function. So we spent lots of time in earlier chapters thinking about how a business is managed, and we learn in chapter 3 then, lots of things will affect how my function is managed, just overall any function. So the structure of the business, the market that we operate in, who owns it, what the culture of the business is like. Now that obviously is equally relevant when we're talking about a particular function, in this case the finance function. So all of those things will play a big part into how my function is managed. Underneath that, we've just got a couple of key objectives that the finance function will have to deal with. And actually, when we when we move on to think about measuring performance, we'll have to consider how well we've done these things. So certainly planning and control, so making sure we're forecasting, we're thinking about what resources we have available, and we're making sure we're using them well, and then actually going out and doing that, so organizing and leading, so making sure we're allocating and coordinating work effectively, that we're motivating people to do some work, and we're getting full commitment from those members of our team. So managing the finance function is going to be very similar to managing any other type of function. It's all about getting things done. Okay, so that's sections 1 and 2 of chapter 7. We'll pick up on sections 3 onwards in the next recording. So if you just have a look perhaps over some questions and then pick up on the next section. Thank you.